Hey everyone, John Lorden here. Thank you so much for joining me on another Brain Scratch, Case Cracked, this one being recorded for Tuesday, November 28th, 2017. Hope you're having a very nice week so far. Today's case is another one that was featured on Unsolved Mysteries. If you want to find that episode, it was in Season 5, and this is of the Robert Stack era. It was episode 20, according to Hulu, or episode 23, according to Wikipedia. I have a link to the Hulu posting of it in the description box below, so you can check it out for yourself. It's in an episode where they covered a lot of other stuff. They really only did about a 8 or 9 minute segment on it right at the end of the episode, so you might want to jump ahead to it, but definitely worth your time if you're interested in this case to see some of the people that are interviewed and put some faces to names here. But with all that being said, let's jump into the case of Gabby's bones. Newell Sessions lived in Thermopolis, Wyoming, a town of around 3,000 people. In 1986, a friend of his was moving out of town and asked if he could store a shed on Newell's property. Newell agreed. Inside the shed was a small trunk known as a footlocker, which did have a lock on it. The footlocker had markings that suggested it might have been used by someone in the U.S. Army, possibly between World War I and World War II. Newell was curious about what could be inside of it, but left it alone. Until his curiosity got the best of him 6 years later. He opened the footlocker and found human remains. Initially, Newell thought he should give the remains a proper burial, but his wife urged him to contact the authorities. Instead, Newell called the friend who left the shed, footlocker, and human remains on Newell's property. He asked him about the footlocker. The friend said he had never opened it, that it was purchased at a garage sale, but he couldn't remember exactly where or when. Newell told him what they discovered when they cut the lock. Quote, "He acted probably as surprised as I did when I opened the trunk," said Newell. "He couldn't believe it. He thought I was kidding him." Newell then contacted the sheriff's department, who dispatched John Lumley. John questioned why someone would buy a trunk at a garage sale and not actually open it to see what's inside. When interviewed by Unsolved Mysteries, the friend, who they hid the identity of but referred to as Gabby, said he intended to open the chest, but he didn't have a hacksaw, so he left it and just eventually forgot about it. 2 days after the sheriff was called in, a stark discovery was made. X-rays taken of the skull showed that there was a bullet lodged in it. This was likely not just an unidentified body, but also a murder case. John Lumley interviewed Gabby directly, once again asking where the trunk came from. Gabby stated it could have come from one of 4 different states and as early as 1973. The details on where this trunk actually came from were very thin. The footlocker and the lock were made at some point in the 1930s, according to Lumley. Gabby was only in his 40s, so Lumley concluded that Gabby was probably not the suspect in the actual murder. However, he did believe that Gabby likely knew more about the victim than he was telling. Gabby claimed that he didn't know anything about the remains. Quote, "What do I have to worry about? I know I didn't do the guy. I didn't shoot this dude. I'm not even as old as the gun that shot him," Gabby told Unsolved Mysteries. March 31st, 1992, the Wyoming State Crime Lab received the remains. They determined the victim was in his 50s to mid-60s, approximately 5 foot 8 inches tall, and a Caucasian male. The bullet was from a .25 caliber gun, likely made around 1904, and not available in the U.S. until 1908. They also noticed some nicks in his ribcage that could have been made by other bullets. Everything was pointing to this murder happening a long time ago. But was that actually true, or was someone intending on making it look that way? There was something else in the bag that would seriously challenge that theory. They found a plastic bag from a Hy-Vee grocery store, a bag that wasn't produced until the early 1950s. Due to the arrangement of the bones and some of them being missing, including one hand and 2 lower leg bones, It makes sense that the body had previously been buried, and then at some point the remains were transferred into the footlocker. They took the skull and tried to reconstruct what the person may have looked like using clay. Newell Sessions would pass away in 2003, never knowing the identity of the remains that he discovered. However, this is a case that would eventually be cracked thanks to the relentless efforts of a woman looking to understand what happened to her grandfather. Just last month, 25 years after John Lumley first learned about the remains, he received a phone call from Shelley Statler of Waukee, Iowa. Shelley had read an article about the remains, and based on stories that she heard within her family, she decided to find a picture of the clay reconstruction. She added it to a collage of family photos and saw a striking resemblance. John Lumley urged her to get a DNA sample from her mother and submit it to the sheriff's office, which she did. On October 26th of 2017, they heard back on that analysis. The DNA from the remains was certainly the father of Shelley's mother, Catherine. His name was Joseph Mulvaney. He was a World War II veteran and had 3 children when he died. He was working as a railroad worker in California, and in 1962 he had traveled to Des Moines, Iowa, where his ex-wife lived, to visit his children. Shelley believed that Joseph was murdered by her uncle, John David Morris. John David Morris was actually a stepbrother to Shelley's mother, Catherine. No missing persons report was ever filed for Joseph, and the 3 children never saw their father again. Shelley had also never seen the episode of Unsolved Mysteries about her grandfather. At the end of that particular episode, Robert Stack states, quote, "For every mystery, there is someone somewhere who knows the truth." I don't think they realized how close they were to that truth. You see, John David Morris was Gabby, the man that Unsolved Mysteries interviewed in their segment. A case is cracked 55 years after the murder, 25 years after the remains were found. Shelley intends on bringing her grandfather's remains back to Iowa for a proper military burial. One report stated that Des Moines police are investigating Shelley's uncle, who is believed to now be in Mississippi. However, according to numerous other sources, John David Morris has since committed suicide. So I don't know if we're going to find any additional justice in this case. It was a really interesting turn when I was researching this one and found out that Gabby was indeed the guy. I mean, he blatantly says that, you know, I'm not the person that did this in the episode. I didn't do the guy is exactly the quote, which kind of struck me when I first saw it. Just the phrasing of it, you know, sounds like something you'd hear in a mob film or something like that. But really interesting way that this case shook out. I'm happy that Shelley has the answers for her family about what happened to her grandfather. I know there's a handful of other questions, but ultimately none of them are terribly important. They know who did this to their grandfather, and he's no longer around to answer for that. So this is definitely a case cracked, and I don't think we will see much more progress on this. The only thing I would like to see is maybe a news update that they do indeed get Joseph the military funeral that they were trying to get him. So thanks for spending some time with me here on Case Cracked. Come back to the Lord and Arts channel tomorrow for more, and I will see you there. Take care.